It is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce you all to Melanie Ho. She's the author of Beyond Leaning In, Gender, Equity, and What Organizations Are Up Against, and the founder of Strategic Imagination, a firm dedicated to drawing on the power of the imaginative arts to drive transformational change. Across the past 20 years, Melanie has delivered over 1,000 presentations to a wide range of audience sizes and types. Guys, her experience goes from facilitating retreats for chief executives to, 1,000-person audiences in NPR and CBS and NBC. She's presented to campus leadership teams at dozens of universities, including the little ones like Harvard and Columbia and Cornell and Georgetown and NYU. And then it goes on from there to, I'm sure like community colleges on the corner. In writing Beyond Leaning In, Melanie drew from hundreds of conversations with women across industries, secondary literature, and her own experience becoming a corporate executive in her 30s. Melanie previously served as the Senior Vice President and GM of Research at EAB Global, an education advisory and technology services firm headquartered in Washington, D.C. She led a team of over 100 researchers that provided strategic, operational, and change management advice to more than 150 educational institutions worldwide, including at 90% of the U.S. News top 100 universities. As one of EAB's primary spokespeople, Melanie regularly facilitated university board and cabinet retreats, as well as presidential gatherings on the future of higher education. Her thoughts on higher ed have recently been featured in NPR and Inside Higher Ed. Melanie, I think we have a conversation to have today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
So, enjoy being an entire badass. Holy crap.
You've had a busy first 40 years of your life.
Yeah, it's I've been sleeping a lot lately.
Good for you.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
Any naps? Because I've heard those are fantastic.
Oh, I am all about naps.
You would hate it, Marie.
I'm sure I would. You'd have to tether me to the bed.
That's a different episode.
Entirely. Melanie, you and I got together today because one, the aforementioned sheer badassery, but two, there is so much weight that I think we all carry around as feminists, as functioning parts of society, about how we show up and how we leverage the relationships that we need to leverage in our business world to get us where we want to go, right? We've all got purpose. Those of us that are visionaries or mission driven know what the result that we want is. But I have to say, sometimes we have to take less desirable routes to get what truly should be afforded to most people just because. And so I'd like to dive into the stigmas and the toxicity of what it is to accept male allies as we fight for very feminist things. It's no secret that most of us that have been in business for any length of time have had to learn to play the game, right? In your research, what did you find was most sensitive or even most befuddling or surprising about the concept of allyship and where it plays a role?
Such great questions. It's so hard because so many women in leadership initiatives at organizations exclude men. And I've had a lot of debate with folks about this because on the one hand, women need a quote unquote safe space and a place to make sense of our experiences together, not internalize the biases we face. So I do think it's really important to have spaces where women are supporting one another and able to have honest and vulnerable conversations. But the problem is then we get frustrated when the men aren't helping. And even when I talk to, say, the best male allies I can think about, usually they only understand one part of the problem, right? You talk to a dude who wants to support women at work, defines himself as an ally, and he's like, yeah, I totally get the problem because my wife, partner, sister, mother, best friend at work, whatever, fill in the blank, based on one woman in his life who's very prominent. The problem is X. And I think men are socialized to want to kill the problem as quickly as possible and to look for quick wins. So what most men come into the conversation with, even again, the best allies is, okay, I have identified the problem as X because of the small sample of women I've talked to or this one thing I've read. And the solution is Y. And let's find the fast way to kill the problem and fix that solution as quickly as possible. And what they're missing is the wide array of challenges that go beyond that and the longer term engagement that they need. And I think until men are part of a much more robust conversation, it's just going to reinforce this kill the problem mentality.
So are you saying that we need to get men together so that we can talk about our feelings?
Men need to be able to talk about their feelings. And this is also one of the challenges is we don't have a society that is good at talking about feelings at work. And all of these discussions raise feelings, right? You go into a DEI when I hold DEI trainings, I often ask at the beginning, like, what are the two feelings and emotions that come up when you know there's going to be a diversity discussion at work?
Good question.
And it's the range, right? You feel optimistic maybe because you want this to be covered. You feel hopeful, but also maybe you feel angry because there's a reason why you don't want to discuss this. Or the last time it happened, it was bad. Or you feel afraid, or you feel shame or guilt or whatever. It's usually a mixture of super complicated emotions. And we just kind of push those down. And so people go into the diversity discussions and those emotions aren't disappearing, but they're being ignored. And so the real talk doesn't happen.
100%.
I appreciate that you start that conversation from a feelings place so that can kind of lay the groundwork, because I'm trying to remember where I got this quote from, but it is not from my brain, just so it's clear. The patriarchy shuts a woman's mouth and shuts a man's heart. Oh. And, it's like we have to cultivate a culture where women are encouraged to find and have and own their voices, and men are encouraged to find and have and own their feelings,
I love that quote. I'll find it. Since I don't have a pen next to me, otherwise I'd be writing it down right away, so I remember it later.
But Marie was talking about like playing the game. Can you, from your experience, what is the game and who has it benefited and who has it excluded?
Oh, I'm just like thinking about where to start. There's a scene in my book where I talk about what the boys' club means, and that there's a perception that the boys' club is, men on the golf course or in the cigar lounge or on the squash court or whatnot. And I think that's part of it. That's certainly part of it. And there's great research on the difference between in-group favoritism versus out-group bias. And that, we often think of out-group bias as the problem, and it is. Sometimes the larger problem is in-group favoritism, right? And that's if you've got an organization with a lot of white men at the top, then they're going to implicitly favor those who remind them of themselves. And that can be big things like folks they pick for special projects, but that can be small things like just whose cubicle they stop by to, even of super junior staff when they're walking out the door. Mm-hmm. But I think the boys' club is more than that. The boys' club is any time that decisions are made based on the way we've always done things and the system as it exists. And like 9 times out of 10, the way we always do things ends up supporting men, especially white men, and those who have been historically in power. Sometimes that means it supports women. And sometimes it's women enforcing that. But it's not necessarily about us versus them or about women versus men. I think it's about existing power structures and how those are maintained.
So what does your book title mean to you, and how did you get to writing it? What was the process that led you to write it?
It started really in 2013 when Sheryl Sandberg first published Lean In. And I was at this kind of odd point in my career where I had just moved very quickly into a senior leadership role at work. I had several bosses who, to be honest, just weren't that interested in managing people, and saw that I seemed to be a pleasant person that got along with others. And so I went from managing, this is no joke, 3 people to over 70, literally overnight, like within the course of a few months. Just here are all these people.
Yikes.
Good. but also scary. I was reading all the manager books I could find and trying to wrap my mind around it. And that was when I started to think about both the challenges that I faced as a woman rising in leadership and how it seemed to just get worse the more senior I got. And when you're junior, you look at women above you and you think, oh, it must, they got there and that's great. And you think it gets easier as you move up and you have more power, but actually in some ways it was getting worse. But I also had this data set now, right? Because before I knew my experience, maybe a few friends, but now I was in performance review conversations for all of my staff and for the staff of my peers. And suddenly you begin to see the patterns of how men versus women are talked about in discussions. And things like the prove it again phenomenon, where women, when it comes to promotions, have to prove it again and again and again, and men are bet with based on potential. And I'd hear language of how men were described by hard metrics and accomplishments, and women were described as things like the glue of the office, and just had this huge data set. And would compare my experience with women in other organizations and other industries, and everyone had the same stories. And so when Lean In came out, at first I thought it was exciting because everyone was talking about it. There's a book by a Facebook executive about women at work. This becomes a national conversation. Men were reading it, or at least reading book reviews of it and pretending to have read it and talk about it. But then I became really disappointed. And Sheryl Sandberg really specifically says that Lean In is only one of the things that we need to do. She doesn't say this is the entirety of the solution. It's one book. It can't cover everything. This is the part she decided to look at, which I respect. I had a number of friends who had read the book or they'd listened to her TED Talk and actually were empowered to ask for promotions or raises afterwards. So I think that's wonderful. But corporate America, and I say corporate America, but I really just mean employer culture everywhere in the US, because I think we all operate according to corporate norms, really like sound bites. And I talked earlier about the kill the problem, the quick win solutions. And then you take a Lean In, and it's not just something you could fit on one PowerPoint slide. It's literally 2 words. And so talk about soundbite culture. Now, no matter what challenge seemed to be facing women at work, any issue, and the answer was always like, let's talk to them about leaning in. Maybe we need assertiveness training. The problem is that women aren't leaning in. And to me, it was a joke. Like, we've taken this complex problem and now this one book became well known. And so these 2 words became the solution to everything. And so I became kind of obsessive about it and just started reading, and there's got to be other things out there. There's so much robust research out there, but nobody was reading it. And so I got this idea of writing Beyond Leaning In as a novel, thinking that that would make it just hopefully a little bit more engaging and entertaining for people to engage with the research, but also that through the use of story and through different characters, we go back and forth between the perspective of men, women, different generations, that it allows people some critical distance to engage with the issues and to hopefully put themselves in the shoes of different characters.
I think that's such an innovative way to approach it, because we all know that there's almost like a knee-jerk no that comes with self-identifying as the problem or as part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to get them around that so that they can point to somebody else that's the problem as they slowly begin to see what their role in it is I can't wait to listen to the book. I've already bought the Audible copy of it because I like story time.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest with you. But when you go into these conversations with, let's say, an ally who is convinced that they are the hero in this situation, how does the dismantling of the, and I'm going to call this the Superman complex, because in my mind, even when I was a kid, I would watch my dad come, and he would, after my parents were divorced, he would pick me up for his daddy day. And then he would be gone for like months. And then all of a sudden he would show up again and do something small. And I thought it was so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would fly off again. How do we help them see that this Superman complex of flying in and touching one thing and feeling amazing about it is not a way to solve or connect authentically?
Yeah, that's a great question, because our society expects so little of men when it comes to many things, including childcare, including at work, office housekeeping, right? A woman gets penalized if she says no to committee work, for example. A man gets praised if he does one little thing to help others. It's seen as, wow, look at that chipping in for the good of the group, where women are just expected to do it. Some of that, I think, is really why I wrote Beyond Leaning In as a novel and felt like a novel was really important. Some people said to me, well, if you want men to pay attention to it, you can't have it as being a novel. Why can't it be 10 separate case studies? And so, well, the point is that we actually need to see the cumulative and the systemic effect. And I think that's about, let's give men credit that if they're engaged intellectually in the complexity of it, that a lot of managers will want to understand it. And so I kind of think of it as engaging the part of the brain that wants to solve problems and saying that all of us have, mm-hmm. and pushing back against that soundbite culture that's looking for something simple, and saying, no, look, these are complex problems, and professionals, whether men or women, want to solve problems.
So I'm down with that. I also have a little bit of the let's burn this shit to the ground and see what happens mentality, because I'm not very good at playing the game. What do you say to women who have had to come through the boys' club, and what was their role in making this a standard?
It's so many little things. So I won't give away any spoilers, but one of the big things that happens in my book is, and my book is actually focuses at the beginning on a female CEO, and her name's Deborah. She's in her 60s. She's risen to the top of a tech company, right? Male-dominated field. She's worked hard to get where she is. She's smashed a bunch of glass ceilings, and she's not that stereotypical. There's always this, queen bees, women are cat. She's not that, right? I hate those stereotypes. She has supported women across her career.
Corporate Karen.
Yes, yeah, that's
Business Karen. Not a casual. Casual Karen.
Not a casual Karen. Yeah. So Deborah is not supermarket Karen. She is corporate Karen. She's not corporate Karen either. I'll say that. Yeah. She has women she's mentored, all of that. But there's a few things that I think were her ways of playing by the rules of the boys' club. One of them is that she suppresses her stereotypically feminine traits. So there's a flashback Deborah has at one point in the book to earlier in her career, where she's in a meeting and she's a part of a consulting firm, and they're at the client side, and they have to figure out what's going wrong with the client. And clearly the people at the client side like want to kill each other. And it doesn't matter what business strategy they give them, it will not succeed because these people don't get along. And she tries to raise that, and her male colleagues and bosses are sort of like, who cares? We're not HR consultants. That has nothing to do with strategy. And actually, as an example of a male ally, one of her male colleagues says, "Hey, Deborah, yesterday at dinner, you were talking about what they could be doing differently related to, I can't remember, market expansion or something, or different segments." And she's like, "Oh, yeah." And she talks about that and it gets praise. And not that that isn't important. She can do both. She can talk about strategy and she can talk about culture. But what she learned from that and from other situations like that earlier in her career is to kind of suppress anything that's related to its fuzzy, quote unquote, things and interpersonal things. And so I think she plays by the boys club, first of all, by just deciding that quote unquote masculine norms for success and for what matters in business are more important, and that she needs to suppress her feminine norms, and that she also needs to encourage other women to do the same. She gives advice to younger women about how to make it in their career, right? And it's like, if you're too masculine, then soften your appearance a little bit, like maybe wear your hair down or wear lighter colors. And for women who are seen the other way as too feminine, it's like, yeah, maybe you should put on a blazer, right? And so she kind of realizes all these ways that she's kind of had to play by those rules. And another is just one thing I talk a lot about is organizational impatience. And it gets back to that kind of kill the problem as quickly as possible and not thinking long term. And so there's a point in the book where she makes a hire that's the wrong hire. And she makes the wrong hire because it's quicker, right? And that's often why organizations fail to meet DEI goals, is because it's quicker to hire people who are already in the network, and people already in the network are usually people that already look like the people who work there. And that ends up kind of leading to this chain of events where just things go wrong and wrong and wrong because of this one wrong hire. And she makes this one wrong hire because even though she doesn't think this person is the best fit for the job, her male CFO and her male board chair, even though she is the CEO of the company, but she's listening to their voices in her head that are saying like, no, we need to kill the problem as quickly as possible. We need to fill this position.
Knowing like just how many women have been through that experience, that, we all think we're doing the right thing or the right-ish thing in the moment. It's got to be hard to see how big of a role we've actually played in the overall system, because it's also hard to look at that and see that we still have to play by somebody else's rules today.
Yeah.
A lot of assimilation, I think, to get power. The people with power have to feel comfortable enough around you. And I think people who've traditionally not had power, just out of survival, assimilate as much as they can. And then, the first people in there a lot of times do a lot of assimilation. And then, other generations come and they're like, this is some bullshit. You've got Gen Z people working with boomer men who have a completely different expectation of what masculinity is, about what leadership is. And they're all, in Zoom rooms together.
Yeah. And it's so hard because I often struggle with what advice to give women who are coming up in their careers, right? It's, for example, I often got the advice, get men to think something is their idea. When I drew a comic recently, we put in the show notes, it's a drawing of a mother and a daughter who are watching My Big Fat Greek Wedding together. Have you seen that? There's a scene where the daughter's frustrated, right? Because the mother is always deferring to the father, and the mother says the man is like the head of the house and the woman is the neck, right? And the neck can turn the head anyway. Sorry, suddenly my throat got dry. The woman can turn the the neck can turn the head any way she wants.
Right.
And the mother and daughter in my comic watching this together, and the mom says that works. That's true at work too. Get men to think things are their idea, right? And on the one hand, it's actually good advice for anybody to learn how to influence someone, how to get an audience member to behave a certain way. Like, that's not a bad skill to have. But on the other hand, no, actually, right? Why are we getting men to think things are their idea so that they accept them? But I find that one of the trickiest ones, because you kind of have to do a both and. You've got to make sure that your idea gets through. And sometimes that may require catering a little bit. And you need to make sure you get credit for your idea and that your voice is heard. And it's really, there's no way to win in that situation.
It's a way to wedge in.
Yep. And not like totally sell your soul.
In the beginning, Marie talked about leveraging our relationships, and power is leverage. And that's how we've, been able to get some power. No, yeah. But
make it think it's his idea. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Melanie, you bring such an interesting wholeness to this conversation, because you haven't just taken one person's perspective, experience, or results into account as you look at the totality of this. What is the possible future outcome if we don't start deconstructing or fixing this? I mean, it can just be more of the same shit sandwich we've been eating, but
no, I mean, and the Great Resignation is really interesting.
Yeah, it's when the Great Resignation first started coming through, I was in a space where we had just launched the revolution, and I was talking to corporations about the changes that we were seeing, and they kept telling me, "Oh, no, everybody's going to want to go back to the way things always were." And I said, "I don't think so. I really don't. Why would we want to go back to a broken system?" And then we started seeing the Great Resignation. So that's January. Let's say we're in May. And I was like, I looked at it and I thought, wow, there are some men out there that are standing up for us and leaving companies that don't align with their values. And then I got a few months down the road again, and I was like, I'm not so sure that's actually what's going on. Are you seeing the Great Resignation as more of a response to the toxicity of the culture, or a stand for the individual's values or beliefs?
Right now we're in Striketober. So he's progressing.
I mean, I think it's both. I think it's that in a lot of ways, organizations are inherently toxic. And I think a lot of employers misunderstand burnout, right? There's this sense of, employees who are quitting or not wanting to return to the things the way they were just lazy and they don't want to work hard.
Right.
And people don't understand burnout isn't about number of hours worked. Burnout is about feeling like an organization is inconsistent with your values, and that you don't have community and all of these other, I can't remember the factors of burnout psychologists have identified, but they are so many. It's about more things that are not just number of hours.
Yeah.
Hours worked, so something's got to give.
And I think too, there was a little bit of sting in that for me, because while I have a wonderful partner, there is not a day that goes by that he puts in half of the hours that I do in all of the different hats that I wear. And so it kind of feels like, I don't know if any of you remember this very special moment, but it kind of feels like when we started hearing men say, "I need to take some me time." And I was like, the fuck you said? What? Are you kidding me? Your me time is all the time. I've watched you. And then I pulled down my shrieking and was like, okay, just like grief or pain, it's perspective.
Yeah.
And everybody comes with their own perspective. And perception is reality. So if we're holding ourselves up to the notion that one group of people works harder, or one group of people is more emotionally healthy because they get to get their feelings out, or whatever it is, all of these gender biases and gender normative assumptions don't seem to have gotten us a damn thing. They've pushed us all back as a society, right? We've got issues with toxic masculinity, and I don't know how to undo that for you, boo-boo. Like, I would love to, but I don't know how to fix that for you, except for talk about your feelings, which is not the thing that you want to say to them when they're in the middle of it, by the way. Don't. It's like telling a woman to relax at any time. Don't do it. How can we, in our individual roles, whether it's within our home, as a small business owner, or as a thought leader, how can we start to be part of the solution to fix, I don't know if it's the perceptions or just the bonds of what true allies can be, no matter what skin, gender, or system they come from?
Ooh, big question.
You can just peel that one off, Melanie.
Yeah. I mean, I've been seeing more lately on weaponized incompetence.
Say confidence or competence?
Competence.
Okay.
Weaponized incompetence or strategic incompetence. And it's this idea that often men kind of strategically are not good at things, right? So it's the women always take the notes at the meeting because the men aren't good at taking notes. Or I think one of the things that got
I have terrible handwriting. You need to do it.
yeah. I'm just not right, or I'm just not organized, and at home as well, right? It's the one of the things that got this into the news was a TikTok video of a woman who made this super detailed grocery list for her husband, right? And it was like, go to this aisle and get this exact thing. And I think that's a great example of weaponized incompetence. It's like, then he doesn't have to go grocery shopping because he'll bring back the wrong stuff. And weaponized incompetence, sometimes it's intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And you certainly see that often. And sometimes it's not intentional. It's just unconscious. They've never had to do something, then they're not going to. A friend of mine, after I posted something on LinkedIn about weaponized incompetence, she posted a comment about watching some kids on the playground. And they were elementary school kids playing tennis. And at the end of the tennis game, they all had to clean up, but only the girls were picking up the balls. And the boys were just goofing off with the coach, who was just letting them do that. And at the end, everyone got points for cleaning up, and they all got points, both the boys and the girls, even though boys did nothing. And she said what was most disturbing about this was that, and she didn't have, her kid was younger, so they were just watching. It wasn't her kids playing, but that the parents of those kids were just laughing about it, right? Like, oh, look at that, boys will be boys.
My favorite term.
And yeah, it starts so young, right? What do the girls learn from that? What do the boys learn from that? And so, you fast forward 30 years and at home or at work, they're still playing those gender roles without even realizing it.
In my house, when my husband and I were helping raise our nephews and niece, I'd be like, okay, everybody clear off the table. We're going to do the thing. And then the guys would pick up, two nephews would pick up a fork and carry it in and then mess around and then go get another fork. And then I would watch, the niece kind of just work at it. And then I'd be like, oh, okay, Abby, you've done your third. Have a seat. And the guy's like, but it's not fair. I'm like, oh, no, I was watching. You guys were screwing around. It's not fair that she does more than her part. If it's a job for 3 people, you should each do a third. And they were pissed. Right. And I'm like, that's okay.
Yeah.
You'd be mad at me.
They haven't been called on it before, right?
Pick up a plate. Also, they stack, you know?
Yeah. And, it's that great comic that Maura created, about just the value of how we see different people in their roles. And I can remember being 20, maybe just 20. And I was working with of course, with a used recycling equipment reseller. And as a secretary in one sale, I outsold the entire sales staff for the year. Found a used car crusher for 30 grand, sold it for 300,000 as is, where is, and had to go in and fight for my 1% commission and didn't get it.
Wow.
And I was told, after all, you're just a secretary. And you look at those pieces, and we all create our beliefs, and we come from the programs that we come from. But there's always going to be the smacking of, after all, you're just a secretary.
Mm-hmm.
It must be easier for you to sell because you're tall and good looking, which is so insidious that it makes my skin crawl. But ask any attractive woman in sales, and she'll tell you all the time that men try to blame her looks for any success that she receives. Or even just learning, as I did when I was in my mid-30s, that sometimes boys ruin the laundry so that they don't have to do laundry anymore. It took me a long time to catch on, but I got there. There's behaviors that we all show up with. And I think people like you, like Susie, like I, that are out there calling out those pieces and bringing attention to not only what the problem is, but how we got here, is the nexus of change. We're in a beautiful, crazy time where walls are coming down, things are changing, people are uncomfortable. And we've got to be part of how it all gets put back together. Because if we go back to that broken ass patriarchy, then it's our fault. Yeah. And I don't think any of our listeners or the folks that are in the revolution are ready to sit down and say, well, we tried for like half a year, but the patriarchy was just too much fun. Let's go back. So,
there's been a couple guys in my life who have called me out, and it has made my world better. I was raised to be a quiet, submissive, good girl who made baby humans, and I was raised in a very conservative space. And when I was 17, I moved out of my family's house, and my now friend Jordan, who was then a coworker, we were talking. He's like, oh, why do you always pretend that you're stupid? You're fucking brilliant. It's weird. Knock it off. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, oh. And then I was like, oh, I'm following a script, And then, because of my very intense background, we'll say, my friend Mario was like, what if you were kind to the people you loved instead of always like mocking and cruel and cutting and competitive? And I'm like, well, that's a thought, like I came from an ecosystem where that was the approved behavior. And I think right now we're really being called to look at the ecosystems we come from and to be, and to understand, like I have, with those cruel words, I have created harm in the world. I have hurt people through that toxic shit. And I can't pretend like that wasn't a part of me. I have to own it, move on, and not be shitty. Like make a concerted, mindful effort to be less shitty to people, And it's like, if there's people from the workplace that are like, oh, well, I've never groped a lady at the office, it's fine. It's, how do we get people to look at the ecosystem? It's like, it's not you. It's not what your hand didn't do. It's about what makes some people think that's okay, and what makes some people experience it and feel like they can't say anything. It's not, the patriarchy is a system that we all live into. I don't think it's a thing that necessarily guys are doing. Some probably are, but like on purpose. It's not like they have big secret man retreats and they come back. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I think I need to make you a not shitty button so that you can put that on your not shitty.
Like 76% less shitty. I'd wear it.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is the inner work, right? The inner work that we do as individuals, and how do we do that collectively as a society, and look at the inner work that's saying, hey, there's a background to how our organizations collectively got where they are, and that doesn't mean that we're all inherently bad. It just means that that's the kind of baggage as organizations that we carry as a patriarchy, and how do we move past that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't wait to read your book.
Yeah, and that was just where I was about to go. I am always like waiting with bated breath to read the kind of the inner workings of somebody like you, and how they've processed an issue that seems so unbelievably big to process. And you took the time to break it down for other people so that we can use it as an opportunity to grow. So if you know someone that happens to be of the Doodly influence and wants to be an ally or believes he is an ally, that's the gentleman you want to buy this book for. If you know a woman that had to claw her way up through the boys club and doesn't think that she's part of the problem, or that is just focused on knowing what the truth is and being part of the solution, that is who you buy this book for. Sometimes you're just going to have to use it to beat them with, but at least you'll have the book. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today. There were so many beautiful gems in there. Ladies and gentlemen, do not let the 30 or so minutes you spent listening to this podcast be the only investment that you make in change. Get out there, change the world.
Be less shitty.
Be less shitty.
Yes.
Thanks, Melanie.